Imagine the iconic glass slipper, the whimsical pumpkin carriage, the promise of happily ever after. We all think we know the story of Cinderella, right? But how well do you really know it? Today, we're doing a deep dive into the, well, surprisingly complex origins, the global evolution, and even some really radical modern takes on this fairy tale.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We've looked at a whole stack of sources, articles, research papers, even critiques from popular culture. And what emerges is how this seemingly simple story, holds a mirror up to different cultural values, anxieties, and changing ideas about women and agency.
Absolutely. So our mission today is basically to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights from all this stuff. We want to give you a shortcut to being, well, genuinely well-informed about a story you probably thought you had all figured out.
Get ready for some surprises, maybe a few aha moments along the way.
Okay, let's dive in. We think of Cinderella as, European.
Yeah.
But the truth is, this story, it's much older, much more widespread than you might think.
And finding the definitive origin, well, the short answer is we'll probably never know for sure. It was likely passed down orally for generations all over the place.
But what's really striking is how the core themes pop up everywhere, even when the details are wildly different.
Exactly. Some scholars point towards ancient Greece for maybe the earliest known version. There's a story from the historian Strabo writing way back between 65 BCE and 23 CE. It's the tale of Rhodopis. She was a Greek courtesan, and an eagle apparently snatched her sandal, flew it all the way to Memphis in Egypt, and dropped it right into the king's lap. He was intrigued, naturally, sent his men out to find the owner, and, well, she ended up becoming his wife.
A king, a missing shoe. Sounds familiar. But you said there's another early one, even closer to what we know, from China.
Yes. This one's really interesting, from the Tang dynasty, so around the 8th century CE, much closer in detail. A man named Tuan Chengxi wrote down various bits of lore, including the story of Ye Xian, or Ye Xian. You've got the orphan girl, the evil stepmother, the stepsisters. Classic setup. But instead of a fairy godmother, she gets help from a magical fish, actually the reincarnation of her dead mother. Its bones grant wishes.
Wow. Okay.
So Ye Xian uses this magic to get a dress and, crucially, a golden shoe for a festival. She loses it, a king finds it, tracks her down, marriage follows. You see the magical outfit, the lost shoe, the wicked stepfamily. It's all there, centuries before the European versions we focus on.
That's incredible. So these elements were floating around globally. What does that mean for the versions we usually hear about? Perrault, the Grimms, how do they fit in?
That's a great question. It points to this mix of maybe independent invention and stories traveling and influencing each other across cultures. In Europe, the first literary version we know of, even before Perrault, was Italian, Cenerentola, in Giambattista Basile's Pentamerone from 1634.
Okay, Italian first.
And this Cenerentola, Zezzola is her name in the story. She's not exactly passive. She actually helps her governess become her stepmother, which doesn't end well for her. Later, she gets help from a fairy in a date tree, and she actually escapes the king 3 times before he finally gets her. Quite resourceful.
Right, not just waiting by the fireplace. And then comes Charles Perrault in France, 1697. His Cendrillon. This is the one that really cemented the popular image, isn't it?
Absolutely. Perrault is the one who gives us the fairy godmother, the pumpkin carriage, the glass slipper, not gold, like in Ye Xian, but glass and that famous midnight deadline.
The classics.
But it's more than just the magic. His version has a very specific happily ever after. Cinderella marries the prince, yes, but she also forgives her stepsisters. Completely. Helps them marry rich guys, too. It really reflects a Christian ideal of forgiveness and mercy that was important in his time in court.
Which, as you mentioned, brings us to the Brothers Grimm in Germany, 1812. Their Aschenputtel. Famous, well, let's just say less emphasis on forgiveness.
Oh, definitely. The Grimm's version is much, much darker. More raw, maybe. No fairy godmother waving a wand. Help comes from a wishing tree on her mother's grave, and doves bring her dresses. It feels more connected to nature and grief. And the stepsisters. Brutal consequences. They mutilate their own feet, cutting off a toe, slicing off a heel, trying to trick the prince with the slipper, which is gold again here, by the way.
Ouch.
And it doesn't end there. In the later edition, 1819, at Cinderella's wedding, those helpful doves come back and peck out the stepsister's eyes as punishment.
Wow.
It's absolutely a warning tale. Very clear message about sin and retribution. Not much room for mercy there.
It's really fascinating laying these versions side by side. It makes it so clear how different cultures pack their own values, their own beliefs right into this familiar framework. So looking at that spectrum, Perrault's forgiveness, the Grimm's harsh justice, how does this play out more broadly between Western and Eastern versions? What does happily ever after even mean in these different contexts?
That's a great way to frame it. The way conflict gets resolved, the idea of morality, it really does vary hugely. Perrault's Cinderella, like we said, with that big act of forgiveness, it strongly echoes a Christian ideal of compassion, redemption, turning the other cheek, basically.
But the Grimms, and you mentioned some Asian versions too, they lean towards a different kind of justice, right?
Precisely. The Grimms deliver that severe physical punishment. And many Eastern versions go even further. Think about Vietnam's Tấm Cám or Korea's Kongjwi and Patjwi. These often feature really explicit violence and a strong focus on retributive justice. It reflects ideas like, what goes around comes around, maybe influenced by concepts like karma or Confucian ideals about moral order needing to be restored, sometimes violently.
So concrete examples.
Well, in Tấm Cám, the heroine Tum doesn't just get saved, she actively gets revenge. She tricks her stepsister Cam into boiling herself alive and then sends the remains, well, pickled, to the stepmother, who dies of shock.
Whoa, okay.
Oh,
That's
wait, look.
intense.
It is. And in Kongjwi and Patjwi, the heroine Kongjwi is actually murdered by her stepsister Patjwi. But she comes back sometimes as a flower, sometimes directly to expose the crime and ensure Patjwi is punished, often executed. Revenge is central.
And back in the Chinese Ye Xian version, the stepmother and stepsister get killed by flying stones. Sort of a supernatural justice, maybe. It's worlds away from Perrault's forgiveness.
Absolutely worlds away. And this difference obviously shapes how things like divine or magical help work and what happily ever after looks like.
How so?
Well, Perrault's fairy godmother is this active, almost personal, benevolent force. She steps in directly. The Grimm's magic is more ancestral, maybe, tied to the mother's grave, the doves. It feels earned through suffering and piety, perhaps. But in Ye Xian, those magical fish bones, they have limited power. The king gets greedy, wants to exploit them, and his misuse ultimately leads to the ruin of his kingdom. The bones are exhausted.
So Ye Xian's ending isn't pure bliss.
It's really ambiguous, a far cry from Perrault's version. The king seems motivated more by curiosity and greed for the magic bones than by actual love for Ye Xian herself. It makes you question the foundation of that happy ending.
Which leads to a bigger question about what these stories were. Were they just entertainment, bedtime stories, or something more?
That's where the distinction some scholars make between, say, fairy tales and anecdotal folk legends becomes really useful. Perrault's Cinderella feels like a polished literary fairy tale. It's meant to entertain, spark imagination, maybe teach a moral. It often starts once upon a time, signaling fiction.
Right, sets the stage.
Ye Xian, though, is often classified as an anecdotal folk legend. It was originally recorded by someone collecting strange happenings, almost like local history or folklore. It even starts by specifying times and places before the Qin and Han dynasties, trying to ground it, make it sound like a true story. The narrator often imposes their own moral judgments, too, reflecting the beliefs of that specific time and place.
So one's clearly fantasy, the other presented more like, well, weird news from the past, with a lesson attached.
Kind of, yeah. It changes how you approach the story and what you take away from it.
Okay, let's jump way forward. We know Cinderella is incredibly resilient, adapts across centuries, cultures. But what happens when modern storytellers aren't just adapting it, but deliberately messing with it? Flipping the script.
Now we get into anti-tales. This is a really interesting modern phenomenon. These are retellings that actively push back against, well, the traditional ideologies, often the patriarchal ones, baked into classic fairy tales. They really took off around the second wave of feminism in the 1970s. The goal was to challenge those old assumptions, redefine gender roles, critique the sexist ideologies, and offer different endings, different morals, stories where women weren't just waiting for a prince.
Sounds like a direct pushback against that idea of the Cinderella complex, right?
Exactly. The Cinderella complex, Colette Dowling coined the term, describes that, sometimes unconscious desire some women might feel to be rescued, taken care of, maybe a fear of independence. Traditional fairy tales, where marrying the prince is the ultimate goal, can reinforce that. Anti-tales say, hold on, what if she saves herself? What if she doesn't want the prince? What if she wants something else entirely? They give the heroine real agency, often outside that traditional marriage plot.
And we found a really striking recent example of this. The Cinderella episode from Netflix's 2024 anime series, The Grimm Variations. How does that one work as an anti-tale?
Oh, it's a fantastic example. It introduces Kyoko. She is Cinderella by name, But her character is completely inverted. Instead of the passive, suffering victim, Kyoko is, well, she's sinister. She's manipulative. She's essentially the antagonist, actively controlling and tormenting her stepfamily.
Wow, so the roles are totally flipped.
Completely. The stepmother is actually shown being concerned about Kyoko, trying to manage her. It's Kyoko who's the source of the malice.
How does she manipulate them?
She sees them as her pseudo-dolls. She even says something like, "Each of you has a special place in my heart, my dear precious dolls." It's creepy. She engineers situations like staging a theft to frame a servant and make her stepsisters look bad. It's a deliberate subversion of female passivity. The analysis we read mentioned active scopophilia. Kyoko is the one doing the looking, the controlling, the plotting. She's not the one being passively looked at or judged.
And the marriage plot. The ball, how does that fit in?
It's twisted, too. The stepsisters desperately want to go to the ball and marry the prince, but mainly to escape Kyoko's control.
So it's not about love or status for them, it's about freedom from her.
Exactly. And Kyoko herself, she doesn't even want to go to the ball initially. Her eventual marriage to the prince isn't about finding happiness or security in the traditional sense. It's framed as a metamorphosis into the form of femme fatale. She sees it as acquiring a new stage, a new set of playthings.
A femme fatale.
Yes, that powerful, dangerous, alluring woman archetype. The final scene is chilling. She's with her new husband, the prince, and says something like, "I was just thinking about all the fun we'll have. This shall be ever so fun." The implication is clear. He and the royal household are her next set of dolls to manipulate. It's full female agency, but used in this really dark, subversive way. It completely dismantles the fairy tale ending.
Wow, okay, so even the heroines are getting completely reimagined.
Oh!
But what about other characters? You mentioned the fairy godmother isn't always purely good in some modern takes.
Right, that's another fascinating angle. Even characters we see as symbols of pure benevolence are getting a closer look, a more critical examination. We looked at sources discussing Serena Valentino's Villain series books, which deliberately explore the backstories of Disney villains and sometimes heroes. And her portrayal of Cinderella's fairy godmother is complex. She's described basically as malicious, or at least deeply flawed, kind only to people she liked, and truly evil to anyone else.
So not the sweet, twinkly figure we might remember.
Not entirely. For instance, in one book, Cold-Hearted, which focuses on Lady Tremaine, the stepmother, when Cinderella, now queen, asks the fairy godmother for help because Tremaine is mistreating her own daughters, the fairy godmother is initially reluctant.
Really? Why?
She seems to hold a grudge against Tremaine. She only agrees to help after being persuaded, and it's more out of sympathy for the stepsisters, Drizella and Anastasia, not for Lady Tremaine. It shows bias. But even more striking is the revelation about Maleficent.
From Sleeping Beauty.
Yes. It turns out, in this telling, the fairy godmother was a teacher at the Fairy Academy where Maleficent was a student, and she bullied young Maleficent, criticized her horns, made her feel like an outcast. And then, on Maleficent's 16th birthday, the fairy godmother basically declares her destined to be evil. Talk about contributing to someone's downfall. It paints her as instrumental in creating one of Disney's biggest villains.
That adds a whole other layer. So these reevaluations, the anti-tales like Kyoko's story, it feels like part of a bigger trend, maybe, a way of questioning traditional power structures, not just in stories, but maybe more broadly.
I think that's a really insightful connection to make. This interrogation of characters and narratives does seem to parallel wider societal conversations about power dynamics. Our sources even touched on discussions, sometimes framed through a kink-critical lens, about how people navigate power, control, and submission in their own lives and relationships.
How does that connect?
Well, these discussions explore complex ideas, like how, for some people, engaging with power dynamics, even involving submission, can paradoxically create a sense of control or agency within a specific context. Or how fantasies involving power might be a way to mentally process or conquer fear related to real-life powerlessness or trauma, all within a safe internal space.
Okay, so it's not straightforward.
Not at all. These analyses might link desires for submission sometimes to things like escaping overwhelming real-life responsibilities, or even complex issues like internalized misogyny, or perhaps a search for validation in unconventional ways. It's about understanding the nuances.
So the underlying themes, seeking control, losing control, dealing with trauma, challenging expectations, These aren't just in the fairy tale retellings. They resonate in these broader, quite personal discussions about human psychology and relationships, too.
Exactly. It suggests why these archetypal stories, even when twisted and subverted, continue to hold such power. They tap into these deep, ongoing human concerns about power, identity, and how we navigate the world and each other.
Wow. Okay, what a journey. From ancient Greece and China through Perrault and the Grimms, right up to modern anime and these complex reevaluations, Cinderella is so much more than just one story.
It really is. We've seen how it reflects hope, but also stark differences in justice. How it went from folk legend to literary tale, and now into these radical anti-tales where someone like Kyoko grabs agency in, well, frankly, terrifying ways.
Yeah, and even shining a new light on supposedly simple characters like the fairy godmother, showing hidden depths and maybe even a dark side.
It reflects that wider impulse we have now, I think, to question the old stories, the old archetypes, and the power dynamics they represent.
So the next time you hear Cinderella, maybe pause and think about all these versions flickering behind the familiar one. What does your favorite version say about your world? What kind of story do you want to tell or hear about the agency, about justice, about what happily ever after could even mean?
Maybe the real magic isn't the slipper or the pumpkin after all. Maybe it's the story's incredible power to keep changing, reflecting us, challenging us, and helping us understand ourselves and our world a little bit better.